Hi again, Year 11. So this is the second sort of essay plan and essay that you're going to be writing based on the poetry. Hopefully by this point you've seen Miss Strawn's videos on winter swans and neutral tones, as you will need that for the planning and for the writing of the essay. So if you haven't already done that, just have a little look in your Google Classroom for those videos so that you can make sure that you understand the poems. You've also got the video done by Miss Bywater over at Blaze, which is really helpful, really informative, so you can always go back to that for a more detailed one. So the question that we're looking at today then is compare how writers use nature in neutral tones and one other poem. So once again, thinking about some of our keywords, again, we've got the word compare. This is how it will appear every time. And then secondly, we've got use nature. Now, our chosen poem today is Winter Swans. And I know, having spoken to a few of you, that this is the poem that you feel a tad more confident with. I know several of you are probably shaking your head right now, but it's the one that when I talk about a poem, when I've done my quizzes and my lessons, lots of you seem to always suggest Winter Swans as the answer. So hopefully this one might be a little more straightforward. Both writers are quite clear in their messages and their ideas with this poem, with these poems too. So keywords then, we've got compare. So once again, spot the similarities, spot the differences. How do they talk about things? What kind of nature are they using? Is it the same kind of nature? Are they using nature to say the same things, etc.? Always use connectives. And look carefully at what you are connecting. So is it similar? Is it different? Make sure that you're using the correct connective to do that. Lots of you in the answers that I've looked at so far have kind of used however, when actually the point that you're trying to make is that they're similar. So make sure that you're using the correct connectives to show similarity or difference. Furthermore, what you can do is you can say that you can summarize them at the ends of your paragraphs, so you can start to sort of think about some of the comparison. This poem is more cynical. This poem has more relief. This poem, we feel more sympathy for the speaker, etc. So use words like more, less, your ER words, your comparatives to show that you're comparing. Secondly, then, we're looking at how writers, and most importantly here, use nature. So they're using nature for something. What is the nature representing? What is the nature being used to show? What is the nature used to highlight? So again, use the question stem. I should be saying the word nature in every single paragraph, or some form of nature. So for example, I should be saying words like weather, birds, trees, etc. So anything actually linked with nature. So you can talk about, in these two poems particularly, things like weather, animals, plants, trees, any kind of earth. So thinking about these two poems then, Neutral Tones and Winter Swans. So once again, with our argument, you're thinking about three key things, and this is the same as Romeo and Juliet, the same as Christmas Carol, a what, how, why approach. So with this then, we are thinking, what are the poems about? How do they link with the question? So what nature do they have in these poems? How are they using, or what are they using the nature to show in the poems? Secondly, how do the ideas develop as we progress? So what happens to the nature as we progress? Does it get kind of prettier? Does it improve? Does it decay? Thinking about what happens to the nature, and therefore what they're using the nature to represent, and what happens to that as well. Lastly, then, we need to link back to the writers. So we need to consider like what the writers are trying to do, what they're trying to say, why they've chosen this theme particularly. So in terms of the what, then this is the really sort of basic bit. You're basically saying what are the poems about and why you've chosen this poem, why it's relevant to the question. So firstly, then we've got neutral tones. Well, in this poem, we've got a speaker who remembers the setting of his breakup. Now, it's important that we mention the setting because that's the nature. And he uses nature to show the death of his relationship and the struggle in his relationship. And he becomes more and more bitter. In Winter Swans, we've got a couple who are in a bit of a struggle and they're walking around a lake. So there's a little bit of conflict in their relationship, but there's still care and love in their relationship. And the swans are used as sort of a central metaphor to repair their relationship and to give them hope for the future. So we've actually got quite different ideas here. They both use nature, and actually they both use similar parts of nature. So they both use weather, they both use earth, they both use birds, but they use them in quite different ways. And what happens to that as we develop? Well, in neutral tones, all the way through, the nature is decaying, it's dying, it's never in a kind of good situation, and it sort of reflects how the speaker becomes really bitter and cynical about love. In Winter Swans, however, we get a clear improvement in the way that nature is used in the poem. So we've got quite negative nature at the beginning in comparison to positive nature by the end, and we can see that particularly through the swans and how they're described. Lastly then, why are the writers writing about this? Well, the Hardy, similar to Byron actually, thinking about When We Two Parted, he's showing the dark side of love. He's highlighting the pain and the suffering that love can bring and how it can affect you. So we might want to think, do we feel pity for this speaker? He definitely tells us about his anguish and his suffering. Shears, however, Owen Shears, emphasizes how natural love is, but how you really have to work at a relationship. It's not something that kind of is plain sailing and easy. It can be difficult, it can be a struggle, and you have to work at it to make it a success. With this one, we might be starting to kind of ask ourselves, do we identify more with Winter Swans, perhaps, than neutral tones? So these are our ideas for our argument. You need to make sure that you get the majority of these ideas clearly in your argument. So what is happening? How does it progress? And why is the writer doing that? So thinking about the plan then, the first thing that you should be doing is filling in your planning grid. If you don't do your planning grid, your ideas are going to jump around, you're not going to have a lot of clarity, and actually you're going to lose out on the top marks if you don't do a plan. So please do make sure that you're filling in that planning grid, even if it's just very simplistic bullet points and key techniques that you want to focus on. So we're focusing then on neutral tones and Winter Swans. We need to keep our eye on the word nature or elements of nature all the way through. Remember, with the plan, we follow the progression of the poem. So start with ideas from the beginning of the poem, then progress to ideas from the middle of the poem, and end with ideas from the ends of the poem. It's logical, it's clear, and it shows that you can understand what happens as we progress through the poem, which lots of students kind of miss, particularly when they jump into the end of the poem and talk about the cyclic structure, for example. Okay, so we are thinking about the beginning of neutral tones, but we need to keep our eye on nature at all times. So at the beginning of the poem, what Hardy does is he uses nature to show the end of the relationship. So he talks about, he uses a lot of death imagery. He talks about the ash tree. Think about it, of all the trees that he could have selected there, he picked the ash tree. And that is particularly because of the connotations of fire and burning that you get just simply through that sort of dual idea of the ash tree with the idea of ash in general. You've also got the white sun and the grey. All of those together kind of suggesting this idea of decay and death and pain and suffering even as well. Furthermore to that, you've got the personification or alliteration of the starving sod. So he describes the earth below the tree, the earth beneath their feet as they are breaking up. And he's using it to kind of personify, he's personifying the earth to kind of relate to their relationship. The starving sod, the starving soil, it's as if their relationship is kind of lacking something. It's lacking the nutrients that it needs. In this case, the nutrients being the love, the care, the passion for one another that they're clearly not experiencing. And it gives us this sense of desperation in their relationship, because if it's starving, it's really needing something that it doesn't have. Now, this is actually quite similar to Winter Swans, which opens with particularly the weather to show the difficulties, to show the conflict within the relationship at the beginning of the poem or at this stage in their relationship. So Shears focuses first of all on the clouds and the rain. He says the clouds had given their all, 3 days of rain and then a break. And it sort of reflects the conflict, the misery in their relationship. I always think a little bit about, episodes of EastEnders, if you like. Whenever something bad happens, you've always got the pouring rain. And it's the same with Winter Swan. So he's using the rain, he's using the clouds to represent that idea of conflict and misery. Furthermore, and this is really similar to Hardy, he talks about the waterlogged earth. So almost as if there's been so much rain, so much conflict, so much misery, even sort of referencing tears because you've got the water, perhaps. There's a real kind of struggle, like it's got too much. This has become too kind of bogged down. And it really reflects the struggle. And actually that's sort of reflected as well in the structure. So Shears uses what we call tursets, which are 3-line stanzas. And 3-line stanzas are always used to reflect an imbalance, like there's something not quite right, something kind of moving them or keeping them out of balance with each other, like there's something coming in between them even, perhaps. So he uses tursets to sort of reflect that, and it links in with the waterlogged earth and the clouds and the rain. So they both open their poems in really quite negative ways, and they use very negative aspects of nature as well. The death of nature in Hardy, and the weather in Shears. So moving on to the second point then, as we progress through neutral tones, we particularly focus on the image of the bird to show the suffering of the speaker. And it kind of gives us this sense that there's this inevitable end, like their relationship is doomed. And he's kind of left there suffering. So we've got the simile, like an ominous bird a-wing. So ominous means that you feel like something's not quite right, that something bad is going to happen. And when a bird is a-wing, it's about to take flight or has just taken flight. So it's almost kind of representative of how he is left there all alone, completely isolated, the breakdown of their relationship. He knows this is going to end. The relationship is completely doomed. And there's this real sense of gloom and misery created through this image. Furthermore, he talks about the God-cursed sun. So this is like an archaic or old spelling of cursed. So he talks about how the sun was God-cursed. It's a reference back to the beginning of the poem when he said the sun was white. Again, you've got that death imagery. He knows from the beginning that something is not quite right here. There's unrequited love because obviously he still has this love, but clearly she is not feeling anything back, suggested through the smile on your mouth was the deadest thing. Like she's kind of almost faking it to kind of keep their relationship going, or it's about to break up. And both of these examples kind of foreshadow the end of their relationship and the gloom and the misery that this is going to cause for the speaker. As we progress through Winter Swans, it's similar in that we also have birds to sort of represent the state of the relationship. But in this case, we have swans. Now, when you're thinking about swans, we have the connotations of swans as purity, as innocence, beauty, elegance. Please don't ever say that the connotations of swans are vicious. That doesn't make sense in terms of connotations, but I'm sure lots of you are just thinking about ones that you've seen maybe in and around Yate. And that's not really what the speaker's trying to show here. The swan here is supposed to be graceful and elegant and beautiful and pure, like love. So to talk about it being vicious would be completely irrelevant to the poem. Now, the swans here are used to kind of represent that relationship, the passion, the beauty of natural love. And he talks about the swans in a couple of different ways. So we've got the idea of them being halved in the dark water, but two halves obviously make a whole. So you've got that idea that they're almost destined to be together. You've also got the speech used in that stanza. She says, they mate for life, you said. So there is that moment when they actually speak, which breaks the silence. So suddenly they're no longer separate, they're no longer kind of in a conflict. Just that little bit of speech just starts a bit of improvement for the couple. So we start to see the improvement in their relationship when we're referencing the swans. The swans almost are a catalyst for the improvement in their relationship. You've also got the simile, like boats righting in rough weather. So you've got the reference to them being kind of like icebergs. Again, sort of representing the conflict, but then like boats righting in rough weather, they're able to kind of correct it, that things are starting to improve, their relationship is developing and it's improving. But also, you've got that rough weather, they're working hard, the boats are working hard to right themselves, they want to right themselves, the swans are naturally kind of moving themselves back. So there is this kind of passion and this desire for them to improve and to work together to improve their relationship. They both want this to work. So there's a difference there in that the birds are used in both poems, but in one is to kind of show how it's inevitable and the relationship's doomed, whereas in Winter Swans, it represents how, you know, they have the desire and the passion to want to improve this together. Finally then, we're thinking about the end of the poem. So particularly we want to focus on the cyclic structure in neutral tones. So you've got the pond and the tree. Now, particularly focusing on the pond, generally in like a round-ish shape, having that sort of like beginning end kind of circular idea to symbolize this kind of ongoing pain and ongoing bitterness. He's never going to forget this, similar to When We Two Parted that we did last time. So you've got the cyclic structure, you've got the greyish leaves, the tree, the pond, reinforced by the shape of the pond as well, and it serves as a metaphor for his kind of ongoing pain and suffering. In the poem as well, he goes from past to present. So the final stanza says, since then, keen lessons that love deceives. Suddenly we're in the present, whereas the rest of the poem's all been about the past and what happened. And it sort of shows how he's been scarred by it, how he's been made bitter by this experience and he can't move on. It's kind of marred his future. He becomes really cynical about love. He says that love deceives. So this has literally scarred him for life and he's never really going to treat relationships in the same way. He's never going to trust again. This is a real contrast by the end of Winter Swans. He uses nature, Shears uses nature at the end of Winter Swans to show the repair of the relationship and the hope that they have for the relationship. So they don't have a cyclic structure in Winter Swans. In fact, what he actually uses is a contrast. So the last stanza sort of features the afternoon light, which is often a symbol of hope, which is a real contrast to the start when he was talking about the clouds and the rain. So it's suggesting that things are improving in their relationship. There's hope for their relationship. Furthermore, you've got the simile in the final two lines, in the final couplet of the poem, a pair of wings settling after flight. And there's this real sense of calmness and a real sense of stability as well, and settle through the wings, like the natural beautiful wings and the closeness, a pair of wings as well, kind of highlighting how there's two together, whereas in the end of Neutral Tones he's left completely on his own. So we've got that pair, and that's reinforced in Winter Swans by the couplet at the end of the poem. Remember, all the way through Winter Swans, he uses tersets, 3-line stanzas. 3-line stanzas are used to show imbalance or like something is coming in between them. But the very final lines of the poem is in a couplet to reflect how they're together, they're close, and it kind of links in with that nature imagery of the wings of the swan, the pair of wings settling after flight, kind of symbolic perhaps of their hands coming together, them holding hands by the end of the poem, and the repair and the improvement in their relationship by the end. So what I'd like you to do then is to use these ideas to pop them into your grid. I'll just do an example of that in a second once I've had a look at the conclusion. But please, even if you don't want to use my ideas and you've got your own ones, please do stick with, as the text progresses, look at how you can sort of say, like, they open the poems in similar ways, they progress differently, and they end in very contrasting ways, so that then you're really showing whoever is marking this that you can see what happens as we progress through the poem. It's really important. Okay, so in terms of conclusion then, again, make a choice. So with these poems, which poem is most effective in using nature? Is there a poem that you think is more realistic? Is there a poem that is more relatable? Is there a poem that's less or more successful in using the nature? Can you see how the nature kind of played a pivotal role there? Or do you identify with them more? So you do not have to do all 4 of these questions. I would suggest maybe pick 1, maximum 2, and pop in your answer into that conclusion box. So what you should have then is your planning grid. It should look something like this. Sorry, I really apologize, guys. That should not say romantic love on the left. That should obviously say nature. So make sure you've got nature written in there. So poem 1, we're saying that he uses nature to show the end of the relationship. You've got the death imagery of the ash and the grey and the starving sod. And then that compares to Winter Swans, where Shears uses weather to show the conflict in the relationship. You've got the clouds, you've got the rain, the waterlogged earth, and how it kind of gulps at their feet. And again, you can either use the ideas from this video or you can come up with your own. So if you could please make sure that you fill in your planning grid. Finally then, you need to use your planning grid to write up your answers. So once again, this is the success criteria. So make sure that you are getting all of these things in. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this order, guys, every single time. That makes it quite mechanic. So you can mix it up. But essentially, the key things you need to get from this are, number 1, always start with a link to the question and where you are in the poem. Always use evidence and pick it apart. So if you look at infer, keywords and techniques and effects, all of them kind of go together to pick apart and analyze the quotation in lots of detail. Always make sure you've got at least 2 quotes in the paragraph that you're writing. And finally, always end with a real life link. So that's a link to the writer, to the reader, or the time written. And I've got a couple of tips for that just at the end of this video. Okay, so once again, here's an example paragraph using poem 1, which is Neutral Tones, written by Thomas Hardy. So there's an example paragraph on here in case you need to. Always remember that your second poem, when you move on to the second poem, always start with a connective, and remember to look carefully and think carefully about whether they are similar or different. So always open that second paragraph with however, similarly, this is contrasted in, Shears creates contrast to this when, etc. So make sure your connectives are the first thing that you do, but then follow it up with, again, that link to the question and where you are in the poem. A really nice sentence to use, guys, is as the poem progresses, because you're kind of thinking about the movement of the poem and what happens as we go through. And opening for the beginning, words like establishes, because that means to kind of create a foundation of and to begin with. So there's a start sentences on the previous slide if you need them, and then there's an example paragraph on here in case you need it with all of the sort of annotations so you can see what I'm doing. Finally then, just thinking about some feedback that I've had from lots of you. Some of you were really struggling with the real life section of the paragraph. So there are 3 key things that you can put in with a real life. So the first one is, what is Hardy or Shears trying to show us? What are they trying to tell us? Almost like some sort of message that they have or an idea that they're trying to convey. Secondly, you can think about what effect it has upon a reader. So does it create pity? Is it what you were expecting from this speaker? Why or why not? Does it make you think about something specific? Does it remind you of something? What kind of mood is the writer creating? And then thirdly, how does it link to life at the time of writing? So for example, in Eden Rock, when we come to study that, we know that Charles Causley, the writer there, was reflecting on the loss of his parents. So how it links to kind of the writer's true life or the life at the time. And then what I've done is just some examples of real life sentences that you could put in here. So Shears reminds us how the most successful relationships need work. Hardy creates an ominous and gloomy mood through this image. Shears creates a sense of calm by the end, which ... Hardy evokes, so that all evokes means is to kind of draw out of someone. So Hardy draws out pity in the reader. Hardy evokes pity in the reader as the end seems inevitable and he is powerless. And Hardy reflects on how difficult unrequited love can be. So feel free to use and steal those sentences, guys. You can pop them into your answer if you need to. Moving forward, if there are any things that you're struggling with that you want me just to do in this last bit of the video, please just let me know and I'll pop that in. Absolutely no problems. Also, please do drop me an email or Miss Shawn an email or Miss Jackson an email if there's anything that we can do to help you to tackle these plans and essay answers. You are doing an absolutely fantastic job, guys, so please do keep up the fabulous work. Well done, guys, and see you again next time for the next question.